Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the last session of our PeaceTech Talks before the end of this academic year. I'm Lucia, and I'm a researcher at the Global PeaceTech Hub. It is a pleasure to have such great speakers and participants with us today. So the PeaceTech Talks are organized within the framework of the Global PeaceTech Hub, which is a recent initiative that we launched at the School of Transnational Governance. We are bringing together academics, practitioners, and stakeholders from the public and private sector to foster theoretical reflection and creative policy thinking on the use of technology to enhance peace and cooperation across borders. As you all know, the current conflict in Ukraine represents the first conventional war in which disruptive technologies and digital platforms play a key role. So the idea behind these sessions has been to discuss the different ways in which technologies can contribute to the promotion of peace and build new bridges between citizens of Europe and around the world. This last session will focus on the role of space technologies in contributing to peace and humanitarian response in Ukraine. This can include the use of satellite imagery and data to support humanitarian efforts, taking care of refugees and displaced people, and ensuring connectivity, among many other aspects that our guests will surely speak about. On the other hand, these opportunities are matched by challenges and threats of misuse and potential conflict in space that call for new norms, rules, and principles of responsibility and sustainability to ensure the effective use of space technology for peaceful purposes. So to discuss these and other opportunities and challenges, we invited Peter Bohacek, Space Strategy Manager at TRL Space, and also previously a Policy Leader Fellow at the School of Transnational Governance. We also have here with us today Vasuti Bolo. She's a space scientist and founder and CEO of Gotospace. She will speak a bit about it later. And Luciano Gieso, International Sales Director at Satellogic, which is an Argentinian company specialized in Earth observation satellites and a leading provider of high-resolution satellite imagery. So before starting, I would like to ask the audience to please post your comments and questions in the chat, and we will try to address them throughout the panel. This will be a very informal conversation. I will start by asking the first question, and then we will see how the conversation moves forward. So if it's okay, we can start with Luciano, then I will give the floor to Vasuti, and finally to Peter. So let's start. Luciano, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lucia. Thank you for having me here, and a pleasure to be sharing this panel with these colleagues. I prepared a very short presentation on Satellogic and what we're doing specifically for Ukraine, and I would want to start by introducing you to that. So let me share screen here. Please nod if you're seeing my screen. You are, right? Okay. So I'm putting this in presentation mode. So first, let's see what we do. Okay, let me tell you a bit about what Satellogic does very generally. Okay, in this slide alone, and then I'll go into our actions and what we've been doing to help with civil evacuation and other things in Ukraine. So we're a satellite Earth observation company. The satellites that we do look like the one that you see on the top right. We do micro satellites, and we have today, as per the constellation that you see here, we have 26 of them currently operating and looking at the Earth, being able to revisit any points of interest in the Earth up to 7 times a day. So that kind of revisit gives us a great granularity in looking at different parts of the globe at any time, whenever needed, especially in situations of crisis like the one of the conflict in Ukraine. So this is a bit of where we are and where we're heading. Just to let you know, we look at, by 2025, being able to look at the Earth in real time and being able to remap the whole planet every day. So that's the ultimate goal. Today, as I mentioned, we can do, specific revisits of points of interest 7 times a day, and we're pretty much remapping the whole globe around in 25, 30 days. Okay, so we're really doing better than monthly remapping of the whole planet, and that kind of capacity helps us in helping out in situations such as the one that has us here today. So we're more than 400 employees distributed in different locations. You mentioned correctly that we're of Argentinian descent. Satellogic was founded, I'm Argentinian, okay, I'm in the US right now, but many of the ones who work in Satellogic, we are Argentinian, and but we've spread out, and we were, from the very start, the company had a global footprint in mind, and we are a publicly traded company today. We trade in NASDAQ, and we are, we have different locations and specialities, as you see here on the map, in each of the disciplines of things we do. So going to and into what we do for Ukraine specifically, and what we like to call imagery for peace. Okay, this is a part of different disciplines and things that we do to look at how we can help with our imagery, not commercially necessarily. Okay, and this is not on the commercial side of things. How we can help with our imagery to improve some things in the world. In war conflicts is what I'm going to touch base now about, but we also do a lot of things in response to earthquakes or floods or disasters that happen anywhere in the world. We also use our satellites to better assist in those cases. So with Ukraine specifically, we collaborate with different NGOs, and we are assisting Ukraine and the allied countries of Ukraine and different humanitarian organizations like the logos you see over here and many others in providing imagery as quickly as possible for a number of things, to monitor military movement, to help with evacuation routes, to better distribute resources in the country and in the bordering sides of the country that are under attack, to plan for civilian evacuation, to look, and to assess post-bombarding damage in the places where it happened. So I chose to include here some images. The one that you're seeing over here is obviously an image revisiting the same area in Mariupol, over different days, and looking at progress and looking at changes and assisting with this imagery to people on the ground. We interface with people involved in ground operations and in refugee missions to be able to save as many people as possible and as quickly as possible. The advantage that you have in space is that you can get these images very quickly and help better assist people on ground to move to safer locations or to to locations unaffected in a given attack or whatever could have happened. So there's other images here, more static, with some things that we distinguished. And by the way, we work very closely with a service provider, a very important organization called Astraea, who's a geospatial geoanalytics analysis company. And what they do is they take our imagery and make it available for NGOs and for many different organizations that could profit from those images, again, to help in evacuated civilians and in preventing loss of lives as effectively as possible. There's another image over here of the port, on one of the on the coast of Mariupol too. Our website and many media outlets reproduce different images that we captured, but to keep it all in a single place and to be sure to be helping the organizations that need it. There's a website called ukraineobserver.earth. It's ran by Astraea, as I mentioned just now. But there you can, whatever organization that is, one of the designated and approved humanitarian organizations helping Ukraine in any form can enter there and get a user and look and be able to operate as per the images that we feed there. Last but not least, and I'm sorry, I'm a sales guy, so this is a commercial thing, but this is really, it confirms that the kind of imagery that we're providing is very, very good. Such is that we won in the last Imagery Olympics that were celebrated by the NGA last year. The NGA is the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency of the US, arguably one of the most important Earth observations entities in the world. They do these Imagery Olympics every year, and we won the gold medal for multispectral imagery. So the high resolution imagery that we're providing for Ukraine and other organizations is of real, good quality. So with that, I finish my introduction of Satellogic and what we're doing, and I hand it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Luciano. Super, super interesting indeed. Peter, maybe you want to build on what Luciano just presented, just to speak a little bit more about what role is space technology playing right now in the war?
Yeah, thank you, Lucia, for the word. Thanks everyone for the invitation, and again, it's a pleasure to be here with the other distinguished guests. Thanks, Luciana, for a great presentation on what Satellogic are doing, and it's really part of a big trend that we see in Ukraine. If I'm to summarize this, and that's sort of a revolution in commercial imagery from satellites. Its availability, it's the reliance of governments on different entities on the commercial imagery, and that's something that the conflict in Ukraine has very much accelerated. It has accelerated the U.S. government program for purchasing these commercial images, and it has, in many regards, helped the commercial market in satellite observation, which is something that has been traditionally controlled by the governments and by maybe militaries, to really go full into the private sector and be headed and led by the private sector, which is a very positive thing because it allows some more innovation, more competition, and just a bigger scale and spectrum of capabilities to be delivered. So definitely, that has been. I guess we can say one of the positive outcomes of this terrible conflict and this terrible aggressive war by Russia, but that's something that we can see and that has changed. What another thing has changed, I believe, is that Ukraine and other countries are maybe much more realizing how key are space technologies and space-based instruments for connectivity, for operation, but also for non-military activities. So this has been a big, obviously, argument for investing more in all these capabilities, not only for the military purpose. But one thing maybe I'm going to also highlight is that this war it's not being decided by new technology, I would say, but we can see what role new technology definitely plays in the conflict. And we also see that in space, Russia is not much reliant on their own space-based assets. They do not have that many compared to the Western Bloc, and it kind of shows the maybe strength but also weakness of Western militaries, because they're extremely reliant on space systems. And when we see Russia conducting anti-satellite tests, as it has done a year ago or 2 years ago, they do it deliberately because they know if space gets polluted and it gets inaccessible or it sustainably worsens, they're not going to be the losers of this issue. It's going to affect much more Western militaries and Western capabilities to use this new technology. So I think that's another part of this shift that we have seen. But I would also say that in the reconstruction of Ukraine, space technologies are going to be absolutely critical, from satellite observation technologies that help precision farming, that help reconstruction, that help Ukraine build a new modern economy. And I think that will be critical for Ukraine to step forward as soon as this war ends.
Thank you, Peter. You were speaking about. You started to speak about the risks that satellite imagery also entails. So if you can, you or Luciano, if you can go a little bit deepen on that, what are the risks? What are the problems? I don't know. Of course, I'm thinking about cyber attacks, data breaks. But if you can speak a little bit about it.
Do you want me to go first, Peter? Yes, of course. Every part of our downstream process of satellite imagery, that meaning everything that happens after the satellite captured a raw image, and we have to transform it into an image that is to be distributed privately or more openly to some entity in the world. In our case, we come from the security software industry. Okay, our founders and many of us working at Satellogic are actually not so much bread on the space industry, but more in the IT industry, and more specifically, many of the members of the Satellogic team have been at some point in their careers in IT security. So our images and the methods that we use and the platforms that we use are entirely private and encrypted and secure. And we think, we have a very robust platform to avoid for any kind of breach or risk in how this imagery could be used. But of course, it's something that we keep an eye on, and it's very important that we keep it that way. So I would answer my part like that.
Thank
if
you,
I can maybe as well react, it's the risks are obviously from a perspective of security, information security. So cyber risks can be a big issue, but in a sense, there's also sort of a economic war that comes into play. If a country, a military is reliant on satellites, on satellite imagery from a very good satellite constellation or number of satellites that are several tons. They have sophisticated technology, and they have high value in not single millions of dollars, but tens or maybe hundreds of $1 million. Then it becomes reasonable for the adversary to destroy them or try to attack them with an anti-satellite weapon. But if you have smaller satellites that are in order of single millions of dollars in costs, then destroying them with a missile that is in order also of single $1 million costs just doesn't become feasible. And that's kind of an important, I think, aspect that is becoming apparent in reliance on space technologies, that resilience is very important. And if there is just one satellite or one provider that these countries or militaries are reliant on, then that becomes a vulnerability for an adversary. And I think that is becoming more apparent, and there are new technologies that are being developed to mitigate this. And I think this conflict has shown this, that reliance on the space domain doesn't have to be only advantage. It can be a risk potentially as well.
Thank you, Peter. I have 100 questions to ask you from what you just said. But before that, I want to give the floor to Basuti. Basuti, you have a long career within outer space governance and technologies. So I want to ask you, beyond the war in Ukraine, what are the main ways in which space technology could contribute to fostering peace in the world, not just in the short term, like right now in Ukraine, but also in the long term?
Yeah, thank you, Lucia. My name is Basuti Getibolo. I'm from Botswana, and I'm from Gotospace organization that was launched to train, educate the communities on the use of space technology and applications. So the space science technology is very useful for monitoring resources, and also for communication information, and also to provide information about our environment. Not only our environment, but also the Earth environment. If you link it with the war, like if you use space science technology with wars, is that normally you find that during wars, the war is linked with transboundary issues. You find that the war that is linked to one country is not only affecting one country only. You find that it affects many countries, neighboring countries. But when you look at transboundaries, let's say we talk of the resources that are being linked to the areas of blast, to the areas that are affected. It may be population. If you look at the refugees, they move from one point to another, or one country to another, crossing borders. So what you can use is space technology, because it monitors a larger area. It can give you a real-time information or near real-time information at a larger area. So this, you can also use drones technology that can give you or provide a real-time information. So that's where I can say space science technology is useful for peace when it comes to transboundary issues. Also, it can be used to provide information. What type of information can be provided? It can be information on the risk areas where people don't don't have to be moved to such areas. Let's say maybe there's a distraction like weapons that are being thrown over countries. If you look at areas where there are maybe petrol or where there are also risk, where there's a blast, when it blasts, there might be some shake, the earth environment or the earth or the land can shock, and when it shake, you find that sometimes it can also distract. Some buildings can have some fractures. It can be some blast of other chemicals in the industry. So by using space science technology, you can easily locate areas of industries where the areas maybe they can be hazardous to people moving around those areas. And also another issue is space science technology is also good for communication. Right now we are communicating to each other. I'm from Africa. I'm in Africa right now. Some people are in Europe. It's all over. It's global. But what links us together to provide real-time information or to share information is because of satellite in space that are linked to satellite telecommunications that provides us with networks, internet, and so on. So this is where I can say that space science technology is good for peace and also for humanitarians. The other thing is that where there's a disaster, normally there is a question where and why. And if it is a where question, like where there's a blast, maybe near the water sources, where each and every, many people, they use water for drinking, also animals and plants, you'll find that for you to monitor the area where there are some blasts or chemicals, you have to use satellites. Imagine there's a river flowing from transboundaries from one country to another. Maybe it covers 3 countries or regions. You'll find that the people who are not affected in the area where there is a war, they can be also affected through that issue of waterfall or water flowing from one point to another. It can be air pollution from one point to another, but the satellite can do that way, can give a real-time information of water direction, the slope of the land, whether the area, which area has been covered, because satellites, they have some sensors. They can be mounted with sensors that can even see what is underground or reveal those danger areas and so on. So for now, I can stop here, then I will discuss it next. Thank you.
Thank you, Basuti. Before moving forward, because we have many questions for all of you, let me ask you a very simple question. Maybe, Luciano, you're the sales director, you will be able to answer it, but also, of course, Peter and Basuti. For those of us that don't come from the field of technology, and we are in the School of Transnational Governance and at the Global PeaceTech Hub, where we try to bring together policymakers with technology experts. So what do we talk about when we speak about space technology? Is it just satellites? Is there a simple way to explain it? How would you explain this to people who don't know anything about it?
Whoa, that's a challenging question. So is there a simple way? I don't think so. And by the way, we learned that this is an industry that is ever evolving and that has been in a way adopted by the private sector pretty recently, if you compare to other industries in the world. So this was an industry that since men went to the moon back in the late 60s, for the next many years, and I would say many decades, it was an industry that was pretty much monopolized by states. So it is normal that the public in general has no real grasp of the space industry, like you have had a knowledge of different other industries that were more adopted, and that the private companies in the world have been growing in those industries, not as they have on this one. The space industry has been penetrated by the private sector in the past decade, I would say. There's some exceptions, but you didn't hear of SpaceX or OneWeb or Blue Origin or Satellogic or many others, a decade ago. So I would say, is it only about satellites? No. It's yes, satellites is a component of it. There's Earth observation satellites. optical, like the one we do, and SAR satellites and other sensor satellites that look at the Earth and that have that capture some kind of information from the Earth by looking at it. That's one breed. Then you have the communication satellites, which are allowing this call to happen. That's a different thing altogether. Then you have manned missions, which is sending people to the International Space Station or to the moon, or in some years to Mars, which is another world of space technology. So there are many subsectors within the space industry. I could tell you it's amazing. Okay, that I can say very, very simply. But yes, it's the next frontier of men looking. And then you have, I'm sorry, I didn't mention this, but then you have whatever you see from Earth. You have astronomy, and you have looking what the telescopes see, and you have seen the recent developments in NASA with a kind of new galaxies and new kind of ways of reaching out to the rest of our universe that we're developing. So again, it's too broad to describe briefly, and but I can sum it, I can summarize it in a word, which is it's absolutely amazing.
If I can maybe offer one of a useful division or distinctions that is used in the space industry is the division between upstream and downstream segments or sectors. Upstream means pretty much anything that goes up there in space, so satellites, rockets, hardware, and space probes. And downstream is mainly the data that comes down that we use, as well as the science. And I think what's also interesting to realize about space industry and space technology nowadays is it has advanced so much and has penetrated essentially every other industry and in its applications, that sometimes it's useful to think of space industry maybe just as a tool, because a lot of the data that is being produced maybe from Earth observation is used by regular companies that do agriculture, that find this useful. They integrate it into their processes, their analytics, and it's just penetrating, all the different sectors with its technologies and its support it provides. So, and I think also, to say that obviously the commercial space has developed very fastly, very quickly. It's sort of this new space, thing and theme and vibe that everyone talks about. There's a lot of commercial interest from producing data from Earth observation for so many applications. We could talk about that here for hours. But then you have the space exploration aspect, right? So, for example, for our company, TRL Space, we have our commercial business focused on satellite integration, Earth observation products. But then we also do space exploration. We're working on a moon mission because that's what everyone wants to do, and that's the exciting stuff, to explore space and explore horizons of the unknown. And that's why everyone kind of gets excited about it and gets into the business. But you still kind of have to make money somewhere to be able to be an explorer. So that's I think it's also an interesting aspect about the space.
Thank you. Basuti, you want to add something?
Yes. What I can say about space science and technology is that, in a simple way, is a science that deals with the atmosphere, like when you are off Earth. So that's what we say space, because before, or for a person to take a picture, when you are on the ground, when you take a picture, let's say you take a picture of the world, so you will find that you will take only a small area where you are. But if you are now off Earth, let's say you are off Earth, you are like a satellite there, you can take the whole world. So that's what we say space, the difference between space science and Earth. So it's something that you deal when that is on the atmosphere, not on the ground.
Good. Before going back to Ukraine, because we have a question on it already, but let's change the approach a little bit of this subject. What do you see as the main challenges facing the space technology field today from a governance perspective? What could be done? What is happening right now? And you go ahead, Peter or Luciano or Basuti, whoever wants to come in.
If I can go first, I would say, firstly, it's space debris, space traffic management, and just any ways to maintain Earth's orbits sustainable, usable by all actors, and useful for humanity. I think that's one thing. And the second thing, from my perspective, is use of space resources, which is a big challenge. The discussions were very long to be even launched at the UN level. And there is obviously a danger that we will sort of repeat the experiences we had with exploring Earth's resources. That is just going to become race for the first one to get there, to explore them, to exploit them, and we're not going to use them for the benefits of humanity. We're just going to use them for some commercial interests. And it's very critical. And just to expand on it very simply, is that there's a perfect example, and that will probably be the first one in regard to space resources, and that is frozen water on the moon, on the south poles of the moon. That has become the main interest of space resource utilization. That water is interesting because it can be but it can be split into hydrogen and oxygen, essentially two components of rocket fuel. And there is, a limited amount of this water on the moon that can be captured. The question is, once we get there, what do we use it for? Do we use it to explore the rest of the solar system? Do we use it as a fuel station to broaden our presence in the solar system and expand to Mars, explore Mars and other planets? Or do we use it for something, different, something, maybe commercial? Do we use it for space tourism? Do we use it in a sense, in a manner that allows us to be multi-planetary species? Or do we use it in something, that will not move us towards that direction? So that will be a big question, and that will be a very challenging thing to solve in terms of global space governance.
Basuti,
Yes, for me, the challenge that I see for space governance is that it's lack of knowledge and skills on the space science, technology, or exploration, because you'll find that in other countries or in other regions, find that this technology is still not yet common if you compare to other countries. So the challenge is that, so you'll find that the countries which are using space science technology, advanced countries, they're well off, they understand it, but those which are still starting is very difficult to understand. That's why I see it's very easy for space science technology to be adopted. And the other challenge is funding. Like for you to launch a space, like a shuttle, a satellite is expensive, it's not cheap. And you find that there are countries or regions where they have to reserve the money for the people to support their people. So sometimes it is a risk to maybe to focus on one area, on space science technology only. So they prioritize some of the other things than the space science technology. And also support. If you look at space science, like we are saying, that is global issue, because if you talk of the technology, like we say, that is a space technology that covers everyone, and is also can be accessible by everyone. It can be used by everyone. Sometimes find that these transboundary issues, that the one that can also hinder us, because let's say I'm in another region where there's a lot of challenges, and the other region has only few challenges. But for this other region where there is few challenges, sometimes it is difficult for that. It can be difficult for that few challenge area to support this other area because of that. So really, space is in governance is a challenge because of that, because it focuses on the global issue, not one region. Thank you.
Okay, so to first of all, I support many of the things that were said by Basuti and Petr. What I think is, first of all, the global space governance is obviously a political issue at some point. So it is a challenge indeed. Basuti, you just mentioned, and I agree with you, that there is a difference, between countries that have a long time and a budget for space access, that's better than other regions in the world. I think the good, the to look at that positively somehow, I think the gap is closing. Okay, it was a lot broader a decade ago, or or maybe 20 or 30 years ago than it is today. We're seeing space startup companies and organizations coming up in every region in the planet, and in every continent in the planet. And I think, Petro, you spoke about debris a bit, looking at very specifically what we do to mitigate that kind of thing, and comparing to the old space, because you also mentioned new space as this acronym that describes this new era of private companies like the ones that my fellow panelists and I work for or drive. We decommission our satellites in a way that they burn in the atmosphere. We don't use any kind of what's called graveyard orbits, which was the old way of doing, with mid and geostationary satellites, to just have them float somewhere reserved for dead, spacecraft. We don't do that. Whenever we decommission a satellite, I didn't go into details when I presented my slide on number of satellites, but we already decommissioned 8. Okay, we have 26 working today, but that we launched 34. The other 8 are either already burnt in the atmosphere or on their way to do so. So would they enter a spiral where would they approach Earth, each turn a bit more until they burn in the atmosphere? And they're built with materials to achieve that. So I think there is a much higher conscience in the industry today than there was, and in every sense. It's not on space only. Okay, the taking care of the health of the world and the climate change things that we're talking about today weren't talked about 20 years ago. So I think in line with that is a global tendency in many different aspects of many industries. The space industry also adopted ways in mitigating those kinds of factors as better as they can. And the way we decommission our satellites is burning them all together. No piece of them comes back to Earth or anything like that.
If I may just interject quickly, that's commendable very much that Satellogic are doing it the right way, and it's very important to say that the new companies are moving that way. But I would also say that it's not, the issue has not been solved, because it's the same with the carbon dioxide. Someone has released it in the atmosphere, and who removes it, right? And who is responsible for removing it? And it's the same with the space debris. There's 128 millions of sub-centimeter pieces of debris flying on the low Earth orbit that can destroy a satellite, and they will be growing, because by 2029, with the rate of constellations growing and number of satellites growing, there will be, by some estimates, at least 40 orbital collisions a year. So this is a problem that will come, and someone will have to become responsible, pay for the removal things, and it will be very difficult to do, just like with removing carbon dioxide from our atmosphere.
Yeah, I agree. And there are some companies and especially some space agencies in different places in the world working on on spacecraft that would remove. It's a very difficult task. Okay, and we're nowhere near to have the first prototype working. But that is there are some companies. There are some companies working on. TRL is actually developing that kind of technology, is what you're saying. That's great.
Yeah, we're working on a laser that is not only detecting but removing the small pieces that are very hard to detect, and it's addressing the issue with false warnings, because the issue with space debris and space traffic management is mainly the lack of precise data. So we actually cannot predict the collisions with a good degree of accuracy, and we have about 99% of the warnings of collisions are false. So laser can be a good solution to that.
Okay, we look forward to that and to using your technology, because we had several alarms of collisions in our history of orbiting space. We have our own propulsion and our own, I won't go technical, but the satellite can move in any direction to avoid those kinds of collisions. And we have been, we never went beyond the 98% probability threshold. So anytime we get something as improbable as, I mean the 2% collision threshold, when we get into a 2% collision threshold, then we move the satellite away, or even less than that, to maneuver, avoiding whatever could come. You're telling me that most of them are false collision alerts, well, you know, it's good to know we're still acting upon them, and we look forward to, you know, to using that kind of technology at some point. What we can do from our side is destroy our satellites whenever they go out of life. We have never generated any kind of debris or collision alerts ourselves, but you know, but each player and each actor in the space, you know, in space or in the space industry has to take their own orders or their own actions to be able to avoid this to the greater extent possible. So I look forward to that technology being ready.
This is great. What is happening right now, it's great because it means that we are fulfilling our purpose in the Global PeaceTech Hub, which is to bring together practitioners, the academy, and also, of course, the public policy sector, and to think together about peaceful uses of technology, right? But let me ask you a very simple question. Do you think that Russia's invasion of Ukraine has united the international space community in any way, or maybe in the contrary, it has shown its fragmentation?
I would say it has united it. However, I would also mention that space is like the most, you know, the most peaceful medium that we have for every nation in the world to be in harmony. So you have nations that are now, you know, at the same time at the International Space Station working together that are not, you know, in good terms on Earth. So I'd rather say that, you know, space has always been a good way of bringing people together. And of course, in situations such as the word happening now, it brings them more, or, you know, there's more of that. But no, I would argue against, you know, that it would be, you know, making certain nations of the world go against other nations. I think that in space is not what's happening, rather the opposite.
Asuti or Peter, you want to build on that?
I agree with Luciano that space has integrated everything, the world, so we are one world because of space. Thank you.
I think in a sense it has united West in general. I wouldn't go as far as say it has united the global space community. It has not united, you know, global community outside of Russia. I think maybe we in the West are falsely led into this illusion that everyone is against Russia and everyone views Russia's aggressive, you know, acts in Ukraine as something completely unacceptable. I think that is not the case. But on another hand, you know, it has united West and it has diminished Russia's, you know, industry and capabilities to do a lot of things in space. The Russian space industry has been, since the fall of the Soviet Union, really on the downturn. We have to realize they were the first, you know, they put the first man in the space. They were, you know, the first great space power, and they have gradually lost this capability. And now, most importantly, Soyuz Russian rocket has been one of the most reliable rockets to deliver people on the International Space Station, satellites in the space, and Russia has essentially lost this unique role as the most reliable launch service. So in a sense, what the Russian invasion did, it has definitely, you know, diminished Russia's role in space in industrial terms, and that will be hard to come back from.
Thank you, Peter. So let's go to the questions that we have in the chat. Jay is saying that these are great tools, and he's asking what is the delay in data access if they are not real time, so that an aggressor cannot leverage data to attack.
Okay, I'll take that one. You know, from our standpoint and the kind of data that we're providing through the Astraea platform, as I mentioned, to humanitarian organizations, this is not provided so the aggressors don't have access to it. So it's they are not the users of that data. Rather, the users of that data are the country of Ukraine and the allied nations and everybody who's helping evacuate civilians. And the kind of latency from an image that we capture to them and then process for them to be able to use, it's less than 12 hours. It could be, you know, somewhere between the 6 and 12 hours span.
Thank you, Luciano. So you were in a way answering already the question that Michele was asking. He was asking if the data is open access and if it would be good or advisable to have it open access. What would you say? Would it be advisable? Clearly here not, but maybe in other contexts, what would you say?
So actually, it's not open access. So to be able to the images I showed you today in my presentation are old. Okay, they're 2-3 months old on purpose, because I won't show you what we just captured, because that's not the idea. They're not open access. They're only available to organizations approved to help with the evacuation of civilians. So they're open standards in terms of, you know, you can open them with any geomatics tool, but they're not open access. They're not meant to get in the wrong hands.
Maybe if I can comment on this as well, is that, you know, obviously the space companies need to make money somewhere, and that is, you know, having customized images of the places. But it's also sort of an issue because there are many countries that are not as developed in the space domain, and they are essentially reliant on purchasing, you know, satellite imagery from others. Which has its limits. It has its limits in the way they can define the type of a sensor, the type of data they want, the type of revisit, and the type of application they want. That's maybe one of the sort of gaps that should be addressed between the developed and not developed space countries. Our company focuses a lot on Africa and Southeast Asia to help, you know, space emerging countries to develop capabilities to have their own satellites, to you know, construct parts of the subsystems so they can, you know, have their own systems in which they define the mission operation, the application, the type of sensor, and the type of application they want to use the satellite data for. So, you know, the access to space is essentially democratizing. It's more accessible, but it's not still for everyone. You still need a great deal of expertise to be able to put a satellite in space for you know, for your own country.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. Luciano, I have a very specific question for you. How long does it take to your company between collecting the data and delivering it to practitioners on the ground?
But that's, you know, in line with what I just answered on the latency. That's what it means. The time that it takes from the data collected to be delivered to you know, to the user. In the case of Ukraine, it's as quick as I mentioned. It's like 6 to 12 hours. In the case of commercial clients that we have, typically the time goes from 24 to 48 hours. So we can do better. Some clients don't need better in the commercial areas. You know, that's more than enough. So that's typically the time span.
Thank you. Basuti, I want you to speak a little bit about your project Gotospace, and also to ask you more broadly about space education and what is to be done there.
Yeah, Gotospace was registered in Botswana for it to teach, to train, and mentor the community on the use of space science technology. Because I've realized that there is a gap in the country or in the region of Africa, I find that we are still behind on the knowledge of use of space science applications. So Gotospace is focusing on the youth, on the girls, and these young boys also, so that we empower them with the skills and knowledge of space science technology at the younger age, so that they can understand, because they are our tomorrow's leaders. And also is targeting the leadership, because you find that our leaders are the one who are taking decision, that the one who are always on board or taking decision when it comes to resources like funds distribution in the country. So if we cannot empower them with the knowledge of space science and technology that is being used for monitoring resources, management, and planning, and also to drive sustainable development goals. The country cannot do much. So Gotospace was registered to empower the community, focusing on the youth, girls, and leadership and other communities, not only in the country but regional and international.
Thank you. And you have a global reach. You are working right now just in Botswana. How is it going?
It was registered recently. I mean, the launch was recently on the 5th of July. So the next level is now to get another event that will be focusing on leadership, like leadership ministers, high level people from within the country in Africa, and also international. The international ones, I invite those who are advanced with the technology, with knowledge, so that they empower our region. So that's the main focus of the events, and why Gotospace was registered in Africa, because I've realized that we need to empower each other. Those developed space countries, they have to empower the less developed space countries. So that's how it is going to be done.
Thank you, Basuti.
Yeah.
Before going to the closure, we have a very topical question. What's the role of Starlink and Elon Musk in all this scenario right now? Who wants to take that one?
I can maybe start. To be honest, I was very skeptical at first when I read the news as the war was developing, mainly because I didn't believe he will be able to deliver the dishes required, to catch Starlink. So the mere fact of him saying Starlink is available in Ukraine meant essentially nothing. Well, but he did that. He did deliver the dishes and distributed dishes in Ukraine, and it became absolutely essential service that helped so much the Ukraine military and everyone in Ukraine to in those difficult challenges. And one thing I add is that at one point, internet access in Ukraine from Starlink accounted for half of Starlink usage totally. So it shows that it was absolutely massive and critical help that was done.
Yeah, totally agree. And by the way, we have a partnership in place with SpaceX. We have launched 13 satellites with them, and just signed a contract to launch another 68. So we are very confident. I personally love Elon Musk and his company. So I really put my chips when many people were skeptical and with no real grounds to put my chips in it, but just because we really have a very good trust in the things that SpaceX does. So it paid off, and as Petr mentioned, it was really amazing the kind of help that they were able to pull off.
Thank you, Luciano. So I have a closing question for each of you. What would you say is the most important factor to keep the use of space tech for peace and avoid misuse? Whoever wants to start?
That's a difficult question. I would say that private sector companies acting in this space, if I may go for that pun, is a good sign. Okay, this wouldn't have happened if space was still only in the power of nations as it had been before for so many years. So I have confidence that the fact that people are taking over, space activity and different aspects of the space industry is going to be of a lot of help in the direction that you mentioned.
I will just add one word: transparency. That's the most important thing. If everyone is transparent about their intentions and activities in space, that's all we essentially need: nations, private companies, anyone. So transparency.
Yeah, for me is that I think there must be like strong policies that once those people who are misusing space, to stop it straight away. So I think policies can work. Thank you.
Thank you, Basuti. I don't know if anyone else wants to add something, but we are arriving to the end. I don't know if someone wants to say something else. No, we're okay. Okay, amazing, fantastic. Thank you for this super interesting panel, super insightful. We will continue thinking and working on that, and we look forward to receiving you here in the Global PeaceTech Hub based in Florence. So if you, for the audience, if you missed the last sessions and you want to watch them, you can find them online in our website, which is globalpeacetechhub.org. Without the hub, sorry, my bad. So stay tuned for our next activities. Have a good summer and see you all very soon.